Now let's get down to business.
Nigeria now has a reputation in international business circles of being a place where, in order to get things done, you have to offer bribes. It is not an undeserved reputation, but one I think foreign firms have helped perpetuate. It may be difficult to avoid, but their collusion in these corrupt practices certainly hasn't helped Nigeria. I'm sometimes embarrassed when I think of how the foreign visitor, cocooned in our extremely expensive hotels, must see my country. I wonder if you can ever experience the Nigeria I know and love. I live in Surulere. It's an area that's neither plush nor poor. Here people know each other, greet each other, and have time for each other. It's a place where I can relax and be myself. You see, Lagos has become a hard place. Friends are so uptight these days, suffering from the stresses you associate with cities like New York. Exciting, perhaps, but not conducive to easy living.
Let's get to work.
For the ordinary person trying to set up a business in Nigeria, it's a hassle all the way. There's an incredible pressure to play along with the system. Otherwise, things can take 20 times longer or become impossible. Tina and I encounter this. We've just set up a fashion boutique, our first business venture, and we know how difficult it is if you decide to do it without a godfather, someone with the right connections and the right party card.
Also, pick up the orange.
Oil wealth has concentrated patronage in the hands of government, which of course means the party in power. Since this represents in the minds of most Nigerians a certain section of the country, in this case the north, some people feel they're losing out.
They draw waters up country from the rivers. The Aborigines upon the banks are left dry in their tenements. Engines upon rigs ulcerate the soil. The Aborigines upon the banks may not have their settlements renewed. They cannot even sleep, for flares above woods and waters have so banished their nights. The Aborigines, who generations ago kept strangers at bay, can only now keep wake for their rights. The rights the majority up-country have taken away in the name of one country to turn waste regions into garden cities.
A recent poem by poet and playwright J.P. Clark. He comes from the Niger Delta, one of the oil-producing areas of the country, and he knows well the impact of oil exploration on the lives of his people. They feel that they are no longer in control of things, nor do they benefit from oil money.
They don't have water, good water to drink, good medical service, no good schools around, no good roads, you'll see it all around in the general poverty. And they know it, they cry, they're hungry. Yeah, one gets the feeling, in fact, that those who have political power are daring the people to do their worst. But government is far away from these people. And you can look around you, you'll find that, everything has been packed away and nothing put back. Now we have to rely on ice fish because rivers are dead. They're dead, from pollution arising from the oil industry.
Well, how deep is this resentment?
Well, sometimes the resentment is so deep that sometimes they wish the oil hadn't been discovered.
Today in Nigeria, divisions are increasingly on the basis of class, between those who have and those who have not. But there's no escaping the fact that there are still deep tribal tensions in our country. It's something we don't like to admit, according to Nigeria's greatest novelist, Chinua Achebe.
We have camouflaged it because we are very good at this, we are very hypocritical. So we don't talk about tribalism as much as we did in the 60s. We only talk about federal character. We only talk about a catchment area. These are all phrases which sound to us better than tribalism.
What do you think would it take to change that around?
I always return to the man at the top. I think if the man at the top turned his back on tribalism in a real sense, not in political rhetoric, but in his action, then people will see. It's example. It's because the concept of Nigeria has not really taken root. We talk about it glibly. It's just a concept in the textbook. What is important is your home village, or your tribe, or your family, or your friends.
I understand that.
Mama,
Although my work requires me to live in Lagos, this is my real home, Arondizogu, my little corner of the world. Part of me will always remain here. These are my people. My life is linked with theirs. It gives me a sense of security to know that I'm always welcome here. But my home is now threatened. Recently, we've had to move my father's grave and pull down the family house because a federal highway is going through my village. Not that people here are opposed to roads. Of course we need them. But do we need a federal highway as much as we need health centers, schools, and clean water? Things will never be the same again. My uncle, who's dead now, was married to 4 wives. And according to our tradition, they are also married to me, since I'm a member of the family. So I can expect a lot of pampering when I come home. Often I threaten to sack them all if they don't behave. On the other hand, they can come to me with their problems, and often this has to do with money. I'm expected to help out. This family pressure is familiar to so many Nigerians who move to the cities, as we see in another scene from the Peck Theatre production.
Here's a telegram for you.
Obligations are not just to the immediate family, but extend to aunts, uncles, cousins, and even remote kinsmen.
What is it?
Auntie Tola is ill. They want me to send 350 naira home.
So? And what about Olu's school fees? You promised to give it to me today.
It's not urgent. Your brother's school fees can wait.
No, it can't wait. It's only 150 naira. Please let me have it.
Try and be reasonable.
I said no. You've promised to give it to me today. And besides, the boy may lose his chance for sitting for his GCE if he doesn't pay up by tomorrow. You know that?
We can talk to the principal and explain
Look, Tunde, if you know you're not going to pay it, just let me know. Then I'll know your family comes first and mine is unimportant.
You know that is not true.
Already your nephew John is waiting for you in the other room. John! Your uncle is home.
Welcome, Uncle.
John, what do you want here, Nick?
Now, job I can't find, Uncle. Papa say make I stay with you for some time.
You think it's easy to find jobs in Lagos?
Papa say he go help me, care. After all, I'm a big man.
You people will ride a willing horse to death.
That was the landlord. He says to remind you that the house rent is overdue. 250 naira.
The obligation to help a kinsman, to take care of one's people, is a real problem for us, particularly when it comes to employment.
A great many people have jobs that they cannot do. They don't even begin to understand them. They are in those jobs because they happen to come from a particular part of the country. It's a good thing to have geographical spread and have representation, but it is not helpful to the country or to the people concerned if they can't perform.
We seem always to opt for the compromise candidate, not the best. We know. I mean, we have 3, 4, 5 good people, but the sixth somehow is the one everybody says, let him do it, because we don't want to trust A, we don't want to trust B. C comes from the wrong place. D is all kinds of reasons. So we end up with the fifth 11. We play our league matches with the fifth 11, and so we never win.
Consider a public utility like electricity. Lack of cash and growth in demand only partly explains why Nigerians are regularly cast into darkness.
Well, more money won't give you light, you see, unless you have people who are competent, who are efficient to run the utilities. I think we have simply installed a regime of mediocrity.
Nigeria Airways domestic service is an example of this. In most parts of the world, when you're given your boarding pass, you can expect to get on your plane. Not in Nigeria. Here, if you're smart, you immediately try to find the plane you're supposed to board and slip out before the others do, and the stampede begins. The only problem is that you're likely as not to be after the wrong plane, so suddenly you're all running in a different direction, with the young and the fast-footed leaving the old, the fat, and those with babies on their backs behind.
Why you are doing this? What are you doing?
You know you've made it only when you're safely on board.
Stop! 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 Come here. Come here. Where are you from?
You say we know.
Where are you from? From where?
I'm from Lagos.
Lagos?
Oh, yes.
What is your duty?
Perhaps the most despised of our public services is the customs. Here, officials can become rich overnight, which is why, according to one report, it attracts so many university graduates.
Come here! Come on, come here! Come here! Come here!
Such behavior by petty officials in uniform is not peculiar to Nigeria. What I found peculiar was their not caring what they did in front of our cameras. A group of people are caught smuggling apples, and this patrol goes into a frenzy. I wonder what would have happened if they had found something really big. Customs have been the subject of a number of hard-hitting articles in the press. One of our dailies, Punch, recently accused officials of selling the more lucrative jobs to the highest bidder. Customs Public Relations Officer, Mr. Innocent Okoye, was asked whether this was true.
Thank you very much for that question. I would like to give you a rejoinder to that publication. You notice that undue emphasis has been placed on anti-smuggling aspect of our job by the press to the detriment of our main duty, which is revenue collection. For the past 3 years, the customs and excise revenue has been on increase. For instance, I would like to mention you this figure for the purpose of this interview. In 1980, we collected 1.7 billion. 1981, 2.3 billion. 1982, and 2.4 billion.
Which doesn't seem to prevent smuggled goods from being sold openly in the streets. In fact, these traders told me they regularly have to pay off officials in order to stay in business. Not that some of them have not choice. Nigeria, like the rest of the third world, has experienced the exodus from village to city, and people once there hustling a living as best they can. But Nigeria is a rich country, rich in both human and natural resources. So why do people leave the villages? This village is in the once prosperous cocoa-growing area near the town of Abeokuta. A few years ago, there were over 200 men of working age here. This man has 6 sons. In the past, it would have been customary for at least some of them to have stayed to help him on the land.
Àwọn ọmọ yín mélòó ló yìí wà lábúlé tó ń ṣiṣẹ́ àgbẹ̀ pẹ̀lú yín?
Kínísìn, kíkọ́ ọmọ mi gan kò tẹ́yọ kan.
Kò sí. Ó tó bí ọkùnrin mélòó tó kù lábúlé yìí báyìí?
A lè rí bóyá a lè rí mẹ́jọ bí mẹ́wàá.
It's all part of our present predicament. With oil, there was suddenly so much money in circulation, most of it to be earned in the towns. Farms were neglected, villages abandoned, and those who remained were mainly the old, infirm, or very young. Successive governments, aware of the danger of this neglect in what is still a predominantly agricultural country, initiated one big ambitious scheme after another, culminating in the Shagari government's Green Revolution.
My answer to that is that Green Revolution has given us a lot of food for thought, but hardly any food for our stomach. I mean, it is just another incredible example of mismanagement. Who is in that Green Revolution? Political bosses who don't know yam from cassava, who don't know maize from millet. Go and look at the people who are running it. It's all a way to give money to party supporters.
One of the most prestigious schemes of the Nigerian Green Revolution is the River Basin Development Project. The idea is to harness our rivers to a network of canals to carry water to newly cultivated land.
Those big projects like the River Basin System contribute in total a small proportion to the total requirements and total production of the country. In other words, they represent only the tip of the iceberg. The base of the iceberg consists of the peasant farmers. Secondly, even the little bit they contribute, the cost is very high.
One reason the cost is very high is the disproportionate amount of money spent on administrators in their offices rather than the peasants in the field. When I once covered this subject for television, I found that one official scheme on which large sums of money had been spent didn't even exist at all, except as a statistic on a report. This is how so much of our oil money has been spent, on squandering, embezzlement and neglect. And now with the oil recession, its effect is really being felt, not so much by those with their overseas bank accounts, but by the poor.
People on top everywhere tend to be blinded, and in Nigeria, this is unbelievable. I believe they don't even know the country. It's so easy to become insensitive because such suffering is always in a corner. But if you are in Lagos and you're escorted by outriders and all the days of your life, you don't see these things. And if anybody mentions them, you think he's an enemy, he's a troublemaker.
All this that you're seeing and all the views that you've heard were recorded before the recent coup. A coup that many see as simply a preemptive one by senior officers to head off a more violent action by younger, probably more radical elements in the army and elsewhere.
The people in this country now realizes that our leaders only fight for their pockets, not to the welfare of the poor masses.
As an ex-soldier, what do you plan to do about this?
I've got some people of my kind of idea and belief that we have to gather ourselves together and we have to react. I mean, a kind of revolution.
Now, my fear about that is that something beginning cannot be guaranteed. Some mindless person could take it over, and then you will be in an Idi Amin situation. Now, I don't want that kind of change, and this is why we ought to fight to bring about rational change through democratic processes. I think we shouldn't give up on this. I have to keep hoping, being optimistic about Nigeria, because there is no alternative.
Would you ever leave this country?
No, never. This is where God, in His infinite wisdom, planted me, and this is where I intend to live. I'll travel and come back, but I don't think one has a right even to go somewhere else where somebody else has cleaned up. I think this is where the work is, and this is where I shall be.
Before making this film, I felt like moving to some other African country. I don't feel that way now. For the moment, at least, there's a sense of hope in Nigeria. How long that would last, I don't know. This country, like the rest of Africa, only so recently in charge of its own affairs, is still finding its way. It's easy to forget that we're trying to do in a matter of decades what it took the Western world centuries to do. Perhaps at the moment we're not doing it so well, but at least we're doing it ourselves. And as you can see, not without the ability to recognize some of our shortcomings. The fact that this film was made at all says something for Nigeria. Perhaps it may have seemed too critical in its assessment, but when I go down to Bar Beach, the one place in Lagos where the rich and poor alike mix and come together, and I talk with people, I know many Nigerians share my feelings of confusion and uncertainty about the way things have turned out since our independence. But we hope that this military government can change this, and that once they've done what has to be done, will not forget that ultimately it is democracy, our sort of democracy perhaps, that we want, and that is what we'll demand. We're a very persistent, argumentative and determined people, and we'll get it, one way or another. Then perhaps my song, our song, will be a happier one than